Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to start with a smudge and call in all of the directions and the human and non-human ancestors supporting our work, and thank them and thank you for being here. There we go. And I want to acknowledge all the ancestors of the lands that we are meeting on, and the lands of everybody who's connecting, whether you're live or watching this later. And the ancestors of my lineage and spirit, and of your lineage and spirit, Ellis, who are supporting our dialogue today. This is being recorded for anybody who's on right now, so it can be on Facebook later and other people can join the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie.
Let's talk about ancestors, Ellis, and ancestral healing.
Absolutely. I was just reflecting actually on how I first came across your work, and it was through a blog post. So I'm not even sure when that was created, maybe even a couple of years ago, but just shows you that the work that we're putting out now could be useful for someone down the track, wherever they access it. So hopefully this recording can shed some light and be of use to anyone who may be listening to this. And thank you for that. And that particular post was actually about animism, and it had struck me so much and led me to your website at that time, where I read your bio and you shared a lot about your journey.
Yeah.
Sent you an email. I actually had a look at that this morning, and what did I actually write about? And I talked about my own journey and the challenges that I had in 2015, which is about 6 years ago now, because I felt some resonance and connection to what you shared on your website, in your biography at that point. And that's when you introduced me to ancestral healing. And that was really my, I suppose, introduction to this concept. And it's still unfolding, very much so, 6 years down the track. But I feel like the clues have been there for a long time. But certain things happen in our life to lead us to that. And so, speaking about your journey, Valerie, I'm really excited to ask you some questions about how that's unfolded as well.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, for people who don't know, Valerie has a website, earthethos.net, where she's also got a fantastic blog section where she regularly updates us on certain concepts within shamanism, animism, ancestral healing. And one of your most recent blog posts, I think that was posted on April 26th, titled Lived Experience Knowledge. I really resonated with that post, and if you don't mind, I actually just wanted to share your concluding paragraph.
Yes.
With that. I think that might be a good introduction. So you wrote here, for most of my life, I have lived in denial about my value and worth. And it's been a continual series of blessings to be freed of wounds and remember who I am and why I am here. Through trauma healing and spiritual awakenings, I have been on a journey of becoming free. I have learned to courageously speak my truth, embody sovereignty with dignity, and live interdependently with respect for all beings. My cosmology, identity, and placement continue to become clearer as I adopt and am adopted by the land, peoples, and ancestors of Australia. And I find myself in flow navigating life through Indigenous science. Though I am very far from ancestral lands, increasingly I feel for the first time in this life that I am centered and at home. I'm grateful for all I have been through that has made me who I am and enables me to support others on their healing journeys. Oh, thank you for writing that. There's a lot packed into that paragraph alone, I feel. And now that I've shared my introduction to what ancestral healing is, I'm curious to know when did you first become aware of the concept of ancestral healing? And I'm also curious about how that understanding in your definition of ancestral healing has evolved over time.
Yeah. Well, it's fun to think about this actually. I'm trying to go back. Ancestry as a energy has been really big in my life. I've always felt a lot of conflict in that space and a lot of trauma and sadness. So, on one family line, I'm Jewish and just a couple generations from the US, originally Eastern Europe before that. And then on the other, German, but this small Indigenous minority German. So the Jewish German wound was big. And I would feel that conflict. And only recently have I realized, Ellis, in terms of kinship, in the Jewish system, in the Jewish kinship system, you inherit from your mother, which means from her family's perspective and all those ancestors, I'm Jewish. But in the Germanic kinship system, the daughters inherit from the father and the sons inherit from the mother. So from that perspective, I am in that Germanic kinship line, right? And I only realized recently I've had a very different journey than my brother. But in both of those kinship structures that we're part of, he inherits from my mom. And he's got a very different path. Whereas I've had this feeling inside me of this tug of war for a really long time. And it's taken a lot of unpacking to realize, oh, that's part of why, because those ancestral structures have actually been in conflict. And I've had to realize that to then be able to communicate with my ancestors what I'm doing and what feels right for me. So that's one. And another is I've felt land very strongly. When I was a really young child, I was in Ohio. That's where I was born in the US. There are a lot of ancient mounds there. And Columbus, where I was born, has these beautiful round mound structures that we actually don't even know the name of the peoples who built them, because the Shawnee who settled there later, no, it wasn't theirs. It was there before them. And I used to have visions of some of those indigenous kind of faces of the land in my mind's eye as a little kid. And I would go on these dream journeys with people. Because I was being very abused in the physical world, I dissociated quite a bit and I had a really amazing dream world. And so from my young age, I had a lot of contact through dreams, and I got into lucid dreaming, not knowing the phrase. And I kept dream diaries from when I was 8 years old until I was about 25 or 6. So that world became very big for me, and I was in that spirit dream world a lot of the time. So that was a connection with ancestry, but I wouldn't have named it that way until much later in my life. Yeah. And then when I was on a sex abuse healing journey in more recent years as an adult, I heard this Indigenous healer in South America say, a lot of people come here for healing and they think all these voices in their head are their own ego. And he said, from my perspective, it's about 10% ego and 90% ancestral trauma. That really resonated with me. And then I started unpacking, what does that mean? And what do I do with that? And something that I found that really helps me was very first step creating a physical ancestral altar outside my body
Mm-hmm.
was a really important way to get
Yeah.
clarity, just to look at what that is and that energy.
Yeah.
And I created two quite small altars and I had them just outside my house. The first altar was literally hit by lightning and exploded.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
The second altar had a tree fall on it and totally broke and fell apart.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and before that in my life, I'd had quite a number of near death experiences over the years, increasingly as I got older. I also had somehow was one of those people who would attract car crashes and things for unknown reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
But once I created this altar space, what I realized was, oh, actually, that's ancestral energy playing out through me because I didn't give it a space to honor it. Once
Mm.
I did
Mm-hmm.
that, it
Mm-hmm.
was out of my body and I could look at it. And over time, as I've done that and as that healing has evolved for me, now my altar is quite simple and I, leave offerings and light a candle, a bit of water from a full moon, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's much more stable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
When
from
I
what I can see, it's changed over time as well. Certainly mine has.
Yeah.
And the concept of having an ancestral altar was actually your first piece of advice to me. Looking back at our exchange over email, which I have found incredibly valuable. And it is about, I feel, finding that ancestral energy. Like you said, that saying, um, I remember when you were telling me, it was very eye-opening and very much resonated with it. And it also reminds me of this Filipino proverb, actually, which I might share, which is just nice and short. It's basically in Filipino, in Tagalog, it says, "Ang hindi lumingon sa pinanggagalingan ay di makakarating sa paroroonan," which translates to, "One who ignores the past arrives nowhere." That's quite a confronting um, proverb, really. But it reminds me of what you said, 10% of our internal chatter,
Mm.
just being the ego, and 90% is that ancestral energy or ancestors
You have
wanting to
an
make contact.
interesting story about that, Ellis, because you started your life on, that with connection to that ancestral land lineage and having all of these family around you, human and non-human, right? And then you moved
Mm-hmm.
to a new country, a new place.
Mm-hmm.
So you had this experience of being the fish in the water and you don't realize that's the water, and then leaving and
Mm-hmm.
being out of the water and being able to look back. So I'm curious, now that you've been doing this work for a while, what your
Mm-hmm.
perspective on that is.
Look, it's like you said, unpacking it. There's really no guidebook to it. It's not a healing journey that you can do a course on, or you can read a book and go, "Yep, that's it. I'm good. I'll do the work and I'm healed." Um, Similar to what you said, you've been tapping into this ancestral energy, ancestral healing work without really knowing, having heard the concepts or tying it to a particular term. And I think that was the case for me until I was literally shaken by an event on July 2, 2015, which you and I think, have agreed to call it a very much a heart-opening experience, which involved a medical condition where I had to go to the ER with
Yeah.
an undiagnosed cardiac condition, baffle doctors, specialists around Australia, where I was seeking answers for months. Um, you know, Coming from a clinical background, that was my first port of call to understand. Okay, I'm this biological being. Um, I'm having symptoms that medical specialists can't explain what's going on, and it was this little piece of it was really looking back at my environment at that time, what happened in July 2015, and the breadcrumbs that was left behind. And the interesting thing about that, July 2015 is actually my grandfather's death anniversary, and I also carry his name, um, my second name. So his name is Bienvenido. My second name is Bien. And July 2015 was his death anniversary. And that was pretty much, I would say, a huge catalyst for my spiritual awakening, which occurred here in Sydney, Australia.
It's interesting. When you're talking about how you were going to the Western medical system and they couldn't give you that reflection of, that would resonate, like what's happening for you, right? So you have to keep looking outside the system. Something that I love about Indigenous science is that there isn't that separation of thinking, so on my Jewish side, if I go way back to where we are Indigenous in Mesopotamia, it was that place that started some of this split thinking that has led to Western science as we know it today. It got built on in Greece and Rome and then in Europe later. But this idea that we can separate natural and supernatural causes of dis-ease that we experience is dates back to then. And that separation doesn't exist in Indigenous science, right? Why, traditional Filipino healers don't think that way. Traditional Chinese medicine doctors, Ayurvedic doctors, nobody thinks that way. Yeah, but if you're going back to that Western system, you go to the doctor and then you're just like, I feel crazy, right? They can't see what's happening. I know something's happening for me.
That's exactly it. And, jumping from a GP to specialists to naturopaths to integrative GPs to psychics to healers, I'm not prioritizing either of them. I think it's me not seeing them as separate, like you said, and seeing how they all fit in the whole as a network. So I think there's this, increasing movement and approach to just shunning one or the other. It's that integration of these different systems. Like you said, ancestral healing is not something that you can put in a protocol. It's very much individual and serving your own patterns, your own environment. And it takes time to unpack. And I'm still very much in the thick of it, I think.
Yeah, well, you're one of those people. When I met you, I think because you come from a culture where it hasn't been that far, where people have been very actively honoring ancestors, that when I met you, I remember saying, your ancestors are right there. Like, they're right there, and they have so much they want to tell you and give you, and the communication channel is blocked somehow in your psyche identity, but they're very there, and they're organizing things, they're doing signs, they're needing more communication and receptivity. Everyone isn't like that, Ellis, and I work with some people, like people with European ancestry sometimes, and because for generations people haven't been honoring ancestors of any land, lineage, spirit, we actually have to do some like very deep journey work, shamanic journey, kind of drum journey, soul retrieval, that kind of thing, and then help people find one ancestral spirit guide who can be a contact point for them, where they have a feeling or an image in their mind's eye, like, oh, when I'm connecting with my ancestral energy, I'll connect into that. Whereas for you, it really doesn't seem like that's your process.
And that's the thing, and that's the individual journey, the lived experience that I'm having, and you've been so instrumental in helping me process and cope with that, because it's just so much easier to follow a system and tradition where, okay, I can fit in that. And can I also just point out how challenging and difficult it is to honor just the fact that, why is it like this for me? Why can't it just be the same for this particular person's lived experiences, Valerie's lived experience, and follow what she did and I'll be fine? A lot of it, as you mentioned in your blog post, concepts, processes, just synchronicity, like you said, journeying within, whether that's through dreams, lucid dreaming, or just things that you notice, patterns that you see in nature, or just by observation. It's incredible, and like you said, how it's manifested in my life through rapid change.
Yeah.
Very
It's
rapid
such
change.
a good example of, I mean, for me, that underlying idea that our ancestors, more than anybody, have a vested interest in
Hmm.
like our living our best lives because,
Mm.
because we carry them, right? And there's this understanding in a number of indigenous sciences that we affect 7 generations on either side, right?
Hmm.
In the past ancestry and in the future because time is nonlinear. And that obviously every time we do something, we can affect the land and non-humans and vice versa. Um, so when you have that sense of vested interest, it's that part of knowing like this is all here for me, which can be really hard when some of it is painful or traumatic, and you have to sort
Hmm.
of sit there and go, all right, that's here for me. There's some wisdom in this, this ordeal that I'm going through. And sometimes ancestors are traumatized and we've got these loops in our head and we have to process that. It's that thing of, all right, well, in your day and time, this is how you learn to survive. That actually isn't going to work for me here and now,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
parsing through some of that can be really challenging. Yeah.
It's a relationship. It's certainly a relationship that you have with them and foster over time, and neither one is more correct than the other. I mean, that's how I personally believe things. Just because I may be connecting with my ancestors, I think it's a working relationship on both parts. And I also just want to highlight, me going through rejecting this notion, this concept, and this idea. Um, when I was asking people about what they understood about ancestral healing, what came up quite often was this belief, and I wanted to see your opinion about this. Is that we inherit what our parents and or ancestors couldn't heal. A lot of people seem to have this idea that that exists and that's something we've all just have to deal with. What are your thoughts on that?
I do agree with that, but I think it's a bit more complicated in that
Yeah,
kind of like
absolutely.
kind of like genes and certain things. It's like I might have inherited particular wounds and my brother inherited particular wounds and maybe some wounds skip a generation or two. um, it's not quite as linear for me, but as a large concept, I do agree with that. That it sort of goes through the whole chain and your lineage, and the same with the land. If something very violent happened on a piece of land, then it's sort of like that feeling. If you walk in a room and people have had an argument, you don't really know why, but something feels kind of funny on a
Mm-hmm.
deep level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same sometimes on pieces of land. If there's been a massacre or battle or something really hard happened there, until we sort of feel into that and then find a way to reconnect and help the
Mm.
land heal as well. It's almost like the land will keep attracting people in trauma, the land's in trauma until we all see ourselves clearly.
Absolutely. It's I agree with you, especially seeing that clearly. And in my journey of looking back at my own Filipino roots, having been born in the Philippines and having spent at least 8 years there in my childhood, um, embarking on this journey to understand the Filipino identity and how that's evolved over time,
Mhm.
in particular before we were colonized by the Spanish and the Americans, what systems existed, how did communities operate, what were in place, which introduced me to the concept of the shamans in communities at that time, which were called babaylans.
Yeah.
So that's a really exciting path that I'm continuing to discover at the moment. And, recalling this ancestral way, it's definitely helping me to embrace my identity, to learn more about it, and not look down upon myself as, inferior to colonizers or other nationalities, cultures, or religion, which I think is something that a lot of people from my background or similar situations probably have dealt with at some level.
Yeah,
And
that supremacy wound from
mhm,
colonizing. It
mhm,
For me it feels really powerful when you talk about that. And even for myself, like
mhm,
this morning I was visualizing some places where I grew up and just imagining the pre-colonized people in some of those places of land, and that just feels really lovely to me because however they got removed, which was very traumatic, um, I can reimagine them there, and that feels healing to see that, honor that, that's true at the same time. Those spirits are still there. They're still
Mhm.
connected to that place, whether their ancestors have physically left or not.
Mhm.
For me, I start to think about connections with lands, right? So in terms of people, if you have people who've colonized and killed other people and hurt these lands, you end up with a lot of karma in the sense of,
Mm.
right, you that energy isn't actually destroyed. So then your people stay on that land, and they start getting sick, and they start needing to connect with that land
Mhm.
and live off that land, and right, they make these imprints. So when I think about that, for like a lot of people in Australia, um, I mean, we all have huge debts of gratitude to the Indigenous peoples here to be able
Mhm.
to live off this land at all.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I'll tell you the story you'll appreciate in terms of medicine. So a few weeks ago, I went with my husband to pay respects to this mountain called Didthul, which is
Mhm.
down here on Yuin country. Um, I just know Didthul is an important mountain. I don't know all of the stories. Obviously, it's
Mhm.
not my culture. But I could feel the energy, and I connected full. It's she's connected with the feminine. She's got a top with a little peak on top, and it's like a breast and a nipple. So it's a very nurturing kind of energy.
Mhm.
So we're sitting there and paying respects, and I sent some prayers about healing. Well, the following week, I found a painful lump in my breast, and
Mm.
that's her energy as I understand it.
Mm.
Then I went to a doctor in a very small area of South Coast, New South Wales, and the doctor turned out to be Egyptian,
Mm.
Mesopotamian,
Mm.
which is my ancestors that have this Western
Mm.
medicine wound.
Mm.
Then she sends me for an ultrasound. I go in another small town to get an ultrasound, and the ultrasound technician is Egyptian. And I'm like, come on, what's going
What's
on?
going on there?
I start meditating while he's doing the ultrasound, and he's like, I don't know, I'm not really sure if I'm finding what I need to find. And I had some insight come to me, and I was
Mhm.
just laughing because then they come in and they do their Western medicine thing, and they're like, well,
Right.
we don't know if it's this or that, and you
Mhm.
get more tests. And I was like, yeah, yeah, I know how this works. You always want more tests.
Yeah.
But I got my answer, and I felt that peace, and I was
Mm.
like, okay, this was about unpacking, and since then the pain's gone away and the lump has gone away. Um,
Mm.
but that was all the power of honoring the ancestors and connecting with that landform.
Mm.
Mm.
Mm. It's incredibly complex, like you said, and very confronting for a lot of people to see how the concept of ancestral healing fit in their life. And I think a lot of people might be asking themselves, like, I did, why this burden? Why this additional burden on me? I'm just trying to exist, especially with COVID environment that we live in right now. What advice do you have for people living in today's times who are incredibly, confronted on a day-to-day basis of changing, rapidly changing times, also being potentially disconnected from their own country and unable to journey back? I know how much I want to go back and connect to the Philippines again.
Yeah.
But who knows when we're able to travel again? What piece of advice would you have for people who are questioning why ancestral healing and why at this time?
I feel like there's just, there's entire moments of synchronicities. Like, why is it that in particular times this movement gathers energy, and it not in
Hmm.
this other time, right? So in this time where a lot of us are not able to travel out into the world and we're traveling inward, is really a perfect
Hmm.
moment to be engaging in some ancestral healing.
Hmm.
um, and there's so much that we can do, just with our own selves, that can be
Hmm.
quite simple, right? So it could be as simple as you light a candle with an intention to honor
Hmm.
ancestors in a very
Mm.
broad way, right? And maybe
Hmm.
you do that one evening a week, and that's beautiful practice. And you
Mm-hmm.
might do that for a month and notice if you feel a bit different or anything's changed. I think also there's ways to connect with ancestries that can be,
Mm-hmm.
again, very basic. So connecting with the ancestors of
Mm-hmm.
the land, walk barefoot on the earth. Where
Mm.
you are,
Mm-hmm.
walking barefoot. So there's a number of indigenous cultures where the science explains that your foot is a mirror down into the earth, just like your
Mm-hmm.
eye is the mirror here, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that foot mirror connects with your inner eye because
Mm-hmm.
that energy from the earth travels up through you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so when we walk barefoot and we connect with the earth and that rhythm, that's a simple way to connect with some ancestors of place. Then from our lineages, it can be playing some traditional music, making certain foods, but it's really a lot of it is about what have our ancestors been doing. So your kitchen might look very different to someone cooking out over a fire, but the basics are the same.
Mm-hmm.
Bathing in your bathtub or shower might look different than swimming in a pond or putting your head under a
Mm-hmm.
waterfall, but the basics are the same. So when we think about some of those very basic human activities that we just
Mm.
always do engage in, your mattress looks different than sleeping outside, in a teepee if you're from um,
Mm-hmm.
northern US, but still there's frameworks where it's easier to tap into that ancestor energy. It might be
Mm-hmm.
harder typing on a computer.
Mm-hmm.
This hasn't been around that long, this tool and this activity, but some of those are just timeless. We've always been doing those things.
Mm-hmm.
So connecting in those moments and taking a moment to just close your eyes, take a breath, and
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, thank you, ancestors, for
Mm.
being part of this, and
Mm.
I invite you to be part of my cooking tonight. Or sometimes people leave a little bit of food for an ancestor on a plate, or give a bit of food to the earth or a drink or
Mm-hmm.
similar to honor ancestors in that way. And then ancestors of spirit, um, it's the way that you have an altar practice, that you pray,
Mm-hmm.
that you um, meditate, whatever it is for you that helps you find those moments of peace in your day,
Mm.
and connect with those deep spiritual energies that all of our ancestors have found ways to connect with in different ways in different cultures, and human and non-human. So
Mm.
I mean, you have this great story recently, right, about crocodile, which is it's an important animal in Australia. It's an important animal in a lot of
Mm.
Africa, Mesopotamia.
Mm-hmm.
It's an important animal in other parts of Southeast Asia, right?
Absolutely, and that's connected to, it was a day full of synchronistic events. It's almost like the universe was just like, let's make everything crocodile this, crocodile that. What you hear about, what I was watching, what I was reading about the news, what I was talking to you about. Um, it was about the crocodile, and I was thinking, what is going on? And then sharing with you a passage from a book that was literally called Back from the Crocodile's Belly, which is this fantastic book, really about power. Um, it's a beautiful book about this journey, different journeys of the Filipino people and their record of severe struggle to understand this link to their ancestral world, and to the Filipinos around the world, and the stories about our shamanic ancestors, who many were fed to crocodiles um, through the process of colonization. So it's this, for me, it was a little bit of a
Literally.
process of homecoming, really,
Yeah,
very difficult to digest.
yeah, but literally, the people were feeding your healers. In particular, my understanding was right. Your female healers, you
Hmm.
had that patriarchy, colonial
Hmm.
women, these
Hmm.
Spanish conquistador Christians were feeding these medicine women to crocodiles
Hmm.
to kill
Hmm.
them. That's so brutal.
Brutal, but really, I think an essential part of my healing process to just understand that and to process that in my own way, whether that was through art, talking about it, writing about it.
Yeah.
um, it's definitely led me to the path of understanding more about our traditions, and even Filipino healing practices, and it's just so rich and diverse depending on the region as well, like it is, I'm sure, in around the world. And it's been surprising for me to see that a lot of these practices, no matter what they may identify as a particular religion or whatnot, a lot of these practices are actually still occurring. And in some of those practices, like you mentioned, connecting to the ancestors with lighting candles and having an altar, it's still very much alive um, in the Philippines and for Filipinos around the world, even in my own family, in my own practice. So thank you actually for running through some of those practices that people can adopt into their day-to-day life, and making that their own.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think sometimes we forget too that we're our own individual ancestors, even in this short life.
Mm-hmm.
Some people like to look at past lives, and there's a lot of value in
Mm-hmm.
connecting with other times and places. Um, but even right, like looking at yourself now and saying, "Well, you today, you're the elder for you as a child, right?" And you're
Mm.
going back, and you go through these times of your life, and you look back at yourself, and you try to find compassion. Oh, that's what I did 10 years ago. It resulted in this challenge I have
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
and similarly, hopefully 10 years in the future, you'll be thanking
Mm.
yourself, thank me for the fact I made some of these shifts, right?
Yeah, I think it certainly strengthened my spirit, undertaking this as part of my journey. And like you said, it certainly gave way to healing, compassion, and a sense of continued wholeness. And this journey that I've been on really wouldn't have been possible, I think, without that sense of community as well, being part of community that you built up. And I just wanted to point out how important that is for people who are considering undertaking this work. Um, it's certainly, you're not alone. There's support for you in person, unseen support as well. It could just be a matter of asking. Um, and it can manifest in ways that we just cannot expect or even dream about. But there's certainly a lot of wisdom to be gained in ancestral healing.
Do you have, in your unique experience, do you
Mhm.
have certain signs or um, synchronicities where you sort of go, oh, that's ancestors, and take notice?
For me, it's being in that flow state,
Mm.
really. It's when I'm not particularly too attached to a particular way of things unfolding. It's just this feeling of, I mean, I'm going to connect this back again to when I first heard about you. It was just reading those words, the way they were structured together, and just feeling it in the center of my chest and going, oh, I'm writing an email to Valerie. I just want to
What's
get to know
happening?
her. What is happening? It's almost like
Yeah.
I'm in this flow state, and it just, the chatter isn't there. That's what I'm finding. So
It feels easier, doesn't it?
it
It just
feels easier.
happens, and you're not. For me, that's part of the power of this, and it's different than power and force. You can feel when something's forced and you're really having to be centered, and
That's it. That's
when you're
exactly.
centered and that power is there, then it's just sort of happening, and you're in it, but you're also witnessing it at the same time.
That's it. It's really hard to explain or to instruct people, well, this is how you get into this particular state. I mean, many have tried and many continue to explain how that is. It's very much internal as well, as much as it is with the physical. And it's a feeling of lightness for me. It's a lot of joy. It's a feeling of joy, and um, it doesn't feel like a battle that, okay, whether or not it pans out the way I should expect it to be, um, it feels joyous to me. It doesn't feel like a sense of dread, interestingly enough, or I need to see a particular set of numbers. Oh, is my ancestor speaking to me? It's very much a state of being.
Yes, it's that flow. That's a great way to describe it. I was just thinking too, it's probably worthwhile just talking for a moment about ancestral trauma in different
Hmm.
ways that um, that comes up.
Hmm.
Um, which I don't know if you've definitely had some. You were talking about that connection with that brutal story you realized of the women in the crocodile's belly. And then,
Hmm.
I mean, from my perspective outside and watching your journey,
Hmm.
um, it seems like there was this very brutal moment, right, where you were in the Philippines and you had this container and then you left. And as that
Hmm.
young kid's psyche, that doesn't make sense, right? It
Yeah.
just feels really hard. It just feels like this brutal chopping, right? You're being transplanted. Whoop, here you go. No choice in the matter.
Hmm. That's how it certainly was for me. Um, what I left was a really beautiful network of close relatives. Um, it's I grew up with both my dad's side of the family and my mum's side of the family, and we all lived closely together, pretty much on the same street. And so I recall when I first moved here, just bawling.
Oops, we lost you for just a moment. Okay, good. You're back. It's so interesting when when these blocks come in and then wondering to ourselves, what does that what does that mean that this part of the story gets cut in this way? Just talking about the brutality of that cutting. As we wait for him to come back, um, I'll say for myself, I had a similar sort of cutting experience. I was raised by a nanny till I was 5, and then my family moved to a new city. And that was a really harsh break for me because I'd bonded to that woman as a mother. Um, but it's interesting because it makes me think about my father. He was the first to leave country and his family and move overseas. And sometimes I still think back and I say, why did you leave your land of sovereignty? And sometimes I feel full of compassion, and I get it because there was so much trauma in Germany after both the world wars. Um,
We're back.
oh, good. Um, I don't. Yeah, it's all right. I was just musing while you popped in and out. How we were just talking about this brutal cutting, and then you get cut off
Hmm.
in the story.
I mean,
um,
what else can we say? There we go.
that
We've
just
certainly been.
demonstrates it, doesn't it? That experience,
Hmm.
and now you're here. And do you have a sense for yourself? And maybe you don't, and don't feel bad. But do you have a sense for yourself, like why you're here now in these lands?
I think for me, as much as I'd like to, and this goes back to me letting go of that really firm concept of this is what I'm supposed to do, this is how it's going to be done. I think now I'm less concerned about how it's going to be done, but what I am sure about is I know it has something to do with that healing journey that I'm embarking, not just for myself, but for my ancestors. And also, it's for my fellow people as well. It's helping to assist others, to guide them to help their own selves and find that inner life and that precious gold that they have themselves, because feeling that they've got a broken link to the ancestral world, that they may be feeling isolated and lonely, that they've hit a dead end, I think it's certainly something to consider, to look at it from that lens, that ancestral healing lens, and their connection to the land that they're in right now, into maybe helping to give a different perspective of their particular journey. I wouldn't posit and suggest that it's the only way to heal. I believe there are multiple ways to heal, but I certainly um, am a huge advocate, a strong advocate for where ancestral healing can take place in one's life. So how that's going to happen, I can't tell you. I'm fine with that unfolding as it is. But my sense of continuing this work, and my sense of, and of second, how that's going to happen, who knows? It's following that state of flow that I may find in. We'll continue to work as a community. Um, it's been a great journey so far.
Yeah, I agree. People are called to different kinds of healing and different depths, right? For some people, lighting a candle once a week or just once a year, having a moment to really reflect on honoring ancestors might work for them.
It's different for everyone.
Absolutely. And for some people, you might feel that calling, like a friend of mine says about everything. You just go, and if it doesn't feel like enough, go a bit more, and just keep going until it feels right.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to see where it goes, where it takes me, where it takes other people as well. And I'm very much interested into hearing about other people's journeys as well, whether they're Filipino-Australian or not. I think this is all a journey that we're all on, and just, you may have never thought about the importance or the relevance of the link of working with ancestral energy. Um, but like you said, at a time now where a lot of us are finding ourselves doing a lot more inner work, being introduced to looking within, and also on the other hand, for myself, I've certainly been doing a lot more domestic travel, exploring the lands that I'm inhabiting now, coexisting with. It's been great.
It's such a
It's been
beautiful
fantastic.
way, right, to honor our ancestors in that big sense, and we're all one big human community, though we are unique in our culture and families and journeys, and we're all indigenous to somewhere, and we all have that indigenous sovereign connection to somewhere on the earth. And some people, it might be a bit farther in their lineage to work that out. They may not have been born on their lands like you, but that's still there. That's just part of being human. We do all have that. And my experience, it can bring this sense of peace as well, and let people release insecurity to know, all right, I have that sense of being strong and centered in country when I'm in this part of Europe, but I don't live there. So I need to honor that that's true for me, and honor that I live here now.
Beautifully said. No, thank you, Valerie, and also just to express my gratitude for the ongoing work we've done together, and even until this day, the resources you put out on you shared with me regarding setting up an altar, I think a lot of people also find valuable. So is there a way where people can, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? They want to know more about ancestral healing.
You can email connect@earthethos.net. You can also go to earthethos.net and search ancestral healing, and you'll find a number of blogs if you just want to start with some readings. And then, happy to have some conversations on Facebook, by email, etc. For me, I'll just close by saying this work, the ancestral healing work, is all it's all gift economy, right? Because your ancestors aren't expecting you to, show up
Mm-hmm.
at this time in this particular way. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
that Western money world. So it's generosity based, but it's relational as well. So you have to give and take. It's
Mm-hmm.
that flow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But there's not a right or wrong way to do this, and there's not a right or wrong time to start or even pause and restart your journey.
Which certainly I've seen in my own journey as well. But like I said, what's been integral has been that support from other people for me in continuing on with integrating this in my path. So thank you, Valerie.
Oh,
Thank you for this opportunity.
thank you for all of your sharing, and we will put this online and hopefully inspire some other questions and conversations. So thank
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it.
you.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thank you.